أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصينا ماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الحمم ولا يناله غوث الفتن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نات موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود فترى القلائق بقدرته ونشر الرياح برحمته اللهم عف صلة سلواتك وسلامة تسليماتك على أول التعينات المفاضة من الأماء رباني وآخر التنزلات المضافة إلى نوع الإنسان كان الله ولم يكن معه شيء ثاني محصي لعوالم حضرات الخمس في وجوده وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام المبين الرسول النبي المكي المدني القرشي التحامي صاحب لواء الحمد ومقام المحمود أبي القاسم محمد الحميد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أخيه وابن عمه وخليفته من بعده وقائد الغر المحجلين ياسوب الدين إمام المتقين أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى ابنته الطاهرة الهوراء الإنسية الراضية المرضية الشفية يوم الجزاء فاطمة الزهراء سلام الله عليها اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى سبتي الرحمة وسيدا شباب أهل الجنة الحسن والحسين اللهم صل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد وحسن بن علي وحجة القائم المنتظر المهدي اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد حجتك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك اللهم سهل منهجهم وعجل في فرجهم وجعلنا من محبيهم ومواليهم وشيعتهم ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما أرسلنا من رسول إلا ليطاع بإذن الله صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. I begin in the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. It is a great opportunity for all of us in this month of Safar, while we are getting closer and closer to the Arba'in of Imam Hussein, and we are reflecting upon the life of the martyrs of Karbala and using that as a means of setting a guideline for the awaiting of the Imam of our time, such that we can truly live up to the expectations of the Imam of our time. The verse of Holy Quran I had the honor of reciting, my dear brothers and sisters, which I quoted yesterday also. This is my third speech, and inshallah tomorrow would be the last. In which Surah Nisa, verse 64, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ, that we did not send any apostle but to be obeyed by Allah's permission. Obedience to prophets, obedience to awliya Allah, obedience to Hujjatullah, obedience to the decisive proof of Allah upon earth, obedience to the representative of Allah only comes through the permission of Allah. Even when people come in and they say that they have brought forth Iman. Quran testifies that, O Prophet, they come, قالت الأعراب آمنا قولوا أسلمنا. They have they come and they tell you, the Arabs, they come and they tell you that we have brought forth Iman. O Prophet, tell them that you have only brought forth Islam. Iman has not even entered your hearts. Iman would enter our hearts only through the obedience to the Prophet. And therefore, even the love of Allah is demonstrated through our obedience to Rasulullah. That's why the Holy Quran says, O Prophet, tell them, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي. O Prophet, tell them that if they love Allah, then they should obey you. And here also in this verse, we are mentioning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that we have not sent prophets so that they would just come and go, but they need to be obeyed. And it is an endorsement by Allah that His creation obeys the Prophet. Although Allah does not put pressure on the Prophet himself when he is asking his creation to obey him. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ. O Prophet, there is nothing upon you except for to convey the message. Whereas to believers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that we have not sent prophets but to be obeyed by Allah's permission. So you better obey Him. Not only obey Him, ensure that your character is upright. You do not dare to overtake my Prophet. You do not dare to raise your voice over my Prophet. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا ترفعوا أصوات فوق صوت النبي لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي. O those of you who have Iman, do not even raise your voices in front of my Prophet. Do not overtake him while you are walking. And do not talk to him as if you talk to each other. That is the sanctity and the respect that needs to be given to the Prophet. And that is the sanctity and the respect that is demanded by Allah, who is appointed by Allah, even if the Prophet of Allah declares. That's why we find on the day of Ghadir, it was Allah's command and it was Allah's desire that the Prophet of Allah declares who his successor is going to be. And with the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we find Rasulullah declared Amirul Mu'mineen to be obeyed. But all the way from the day of Dawatizul Ashira, we find that those who submitted to Islam, the prerequisite of true Muslim is to obey the Prophet. That's why when even in Dawatizul Ashira, the first invitation to Islam, where the Prophet of Allah was commanded by Allah, O Prophet, Anzir Ashiratak al Akhrabin, O Prophet, call upon your closer family members and convey this message. And when the Prophet invites and he declares, whoever supports me and be on my side shall be declared my wazir, my vicegerent, my successor, it was no one but Amir al-Mu'mineen who came forward, not once, not twice, but thrice, until we find that the family left, especially after we see that Abu Lahab ridiculing this whole uh, program by saying, "Oh, Abu Talib, it seems like now you have to obey your own son," because the Prophet of Allah had declared Mawla Amir al-Mu'mineen to be the successor, as he was the first one to come forward and say, "Ya Rasulullah, I will be there with you in thick and thin." And we find Mawla Amir al-Mu'mineen being there for the Holy Prophet for the sake of Islam in every hardship and every challenge. There is not a single war, there is not a single confrontation, there is not a single treaty where the Prophet of Allah wanted Mawla Amir al-Mu'mineen to be there and he abstained from it. And we find that not only that, Mawla Amir al-Mu'mineen stood on the ground. When people were making an excuse in the Battle of Uhud, running away from the battlefield, saying, now if Shaitan is making this cry that the Prophet has been killed in the Battle of Uhud, some of those who were called believers, those who were the so-called companions of Rasulullah, were running away from the battlefield, saying, if the Prophet of Allah is no more, what is the point in giving away our lives? And when someone asked Amirul Mu'mineen, Ya Ali, why don't you also leave? And he says, if the Prophet of Allah is not alive, what is the point in living after him? See the difference, my dear brothers and sisters. And this is what was the most fearful aspect for kufr, for nifaq, for hypocrisy, for disbelievers, for polytheist mushrikeen, whose objective to come into the fold of Islam was to acquire power, was to acquire territory, was to acquire position, and they were not upright, they were not committed to Islam. And that's why we find until Imam Hussein, one after the other, Sunnah of the Prophet of Allah was trampled to a point that now Imam Hussein had to rise up. And Imam Hussein had to declare that I want to walk on the footsteps of my grandfather. And Imam says, وَأَسِيرَ بِسِيرَةِ جَدِّي وَسِيرَةِ أَبِي Ali ibn Abi Talib. This movement of Imam Hussein was to walk on the footsteps of Rasulullah, to walk on the footsteps of his father, Mawla Amirul Mu'mineen. Why? Because the seerah of Rasulullah had been trampled, and there were deviations and distortions in Islam to a point that Islam was on a brink of collapse. And Imam Hussein came in to revive and give Islam back life so that mankind could be salvaged and mankind could be saved from the clutches of shaitan. And for that, Imam Hussein did not need a big army. Imam had a small company of followers who were committed, who had integrity, who stood protecting truth. They did not deter because they were weak on the land. They stood the ground on principles and sacrificed their lives. So, in today's time and age, my dear brothers and sisters, if we are awaiting for the Imam of our time, those are the values that we need to aspire and look for within ourselves. And if we are not doing, then we are deceiving ourselves into thinking that we are truly living up to those expectations. If we are awaiting for the Imam of our time, then we should know that the Imam of our time would need companions like the Imam Hussein had companions, those whom the Imam himself praises. Even in Karbala, Hujr bin Adi was not there. He was martyred even before. I mentioned briefly yesterday about him, how Imam Hussein is protesting with Amir Sham, the father of Yazid. How dare you and your party of shayateen kill Hujr bin Adi al-Kindi? Who was Hujr bin Adi al-Kindi? He testifies Hujr bin Adi al-Kindi and his followers and his companions were Salihin, they were Muti'een, and they were Abideen. These were the righteous and virtuous people. These were the most obedient people in the service of Allah. These were the people who were in complete servitude to Allah. They were not Abidud Dunya. They were not slaves of this world. They were servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then not only that, Imam alayhi salam mentions how these were the people who defended, who rejected zulm, who rejected oppression and tyranny. Kanu yunkiruna zulm. These are the ones who rejected zulm. And then these are the people were yasta'zimun al-munkar. They rejected ta'zim or reverence of what is wrong just to assimilate in society. They did not endorse what is wrong. In today's time and age, my dear brothers and sisters, we find ourselves just to assimilate, just to be able to be like others. We are willing to endorse what is wrong. But Hujr bin Adi al-Kindi and his companions gave their life, but they did not endorse what is wrong. If we want to be the companions of the Imam of our time, we need to cultivate these values. And not only that, they rejected bid'ah, innovation. This innovation, my dear brothers and sisters, not only comes from the opponents of the Imam. If you look at the lives of all of our Imams, one of the challenges that all of our Imams had to endure was of extremism, of ghulu, of either taking the maqam or the station of Imam to such an extent that taking him beyond or what is ascribed to Allah, taking him there, or lowering the position of the Imam. In both cases, Mawla Amirul Mu'minin says, two categories of people are going to perish. Those who take me to one extreme of praising me and take me to the station of God, and the other who tries to smear my personality and lower down my maqam, lower down my position. So there was bid'ah to an extent when, after the martyrdom of Imam Ali, Imam Hassan would call upon and say, Khala Abi, my father said so and so. We find that there were ghalis who would say, no, your father did not say that, your father said this. And they would come in and try to correct the Imam himself. So the point I'm trying to make, my dear brothers and sisters, is the companions whom Imam would want them to be in under his rank, under his army, like Hujr bin Adi al-Kindi, are those who reject bid'ah. They are not falling for the bait of innovation that shaitan brings. And they want to preserve their faith as it was taught by Ahl al Bayt. And they do not want to invent and inject things that are not a slow source of pleasure for Ahl al Bayt or, for that matter, Rasulullah. Who are these people? Furthermore, the Imam mentions these are the people يؤثرون حكم الكتاب ولا يخافون في الله لومة لائم. For effectiveness of the enforcement of the commands of the book of Allah, they did not fear the blame and accusations of those who blame them and those who would accuse them. Meaning, to enforce the book of Allah, they would be fearless from accusations. They would not let the fear of accusations and blame overpower their decision to enforce the book of Allah. Meaning that what prevails for them in their lives? The book of Allah and the commands of the book of Allah. Not what people are going to say. They are not worried about what people are going to say. They are seeking Allah's pleasure. And then the Imam says, what did you do to them? فَقَتَلْتَهُمْ ظُلْمًا وَعُدْوَانًا بَعْدَمَا كُنْتَ آتَيْتُهُمُ الْأَيْمَانَ. You killed them unjustly after promising and assuring safety for them. This is what Amir Sham, the father of Yazid, had done, killing the companions of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Hujr bin Adi al-Kindi, after assuring them of safety, after promising them of safety, they were put to death. And here the Imam is protesting and mentioning, who are these people? These are Salihin. Who are these people? These are Muti'een. They are righteous people. They are obedient people. They are people who are engaged in Allah's servitude. Nothing comes in their way. No blame would stop them from enforcing the book of Allah in their lives. This is how the companions need to be. These are the ones who would reject zulm, tyranny, and these are the ones who would reject praising what is wrong. These are the ones who would reject bid'ah and innovation, my dear sisters. How many of us can go off and do all of this? Have we looked into our own souls to see if we are truly ready for the Imam of our time? Would we be a source of pride for them, or would we be a source of embarrassment for them? This is very important that we definitely remember and engage ourselves and reflect, my dear brothers and sisters. Because if that is not the case, anybody and everybody claiming himself to be the one who loves Ahlul Bayt would not have the opportunity. In the end times, the Prophet of Allah on his deathbed had foretold how my Mahdi shall come and how my Mahdi shall fill this earth with justice while it is going to be filled with chaos and injustice. There's a very extensive riwayah that talks about the Mahdi and the Imam of our time, and it is the Prophet of Allah narrating this to Hazrat Zahra Salamullah alayha, while the Prophet was in his last moments of his life, and while the Prophet was in the arms of Hazrat Zahra Salamullah alayha, and looking at the fate of her father who was sinking, she starts crying, and a tears starts falling on the face of Rasulullah. The narration says that the Prophet of Allah wakes up and he sees that his beloved daughter is already crying while he is alive. And he says, "Oh, my beloved Fatima, why are you doing so? Oh, my beloved Fatima, why are you so upset?" And we find that she responds by saying, "Yeah, oh, my beloved father, I see how we will be trivialized after you." And then the Prophet of Allah starts consoling Fatima in this riwayah, in which the Prophet of Allah mentions how Allah has given, O Fatima, you these six qualities that none other had. And then he starts counting that your father is the not only the prophet, but he is the leader of all the prophets. Your husband is the leader of all the awsiya, and your uncle is the one who is Ja'far Tayyar, and your sons are Sayyida Shabab Ahlul Jannah, and goes on until it comes to the Mahdi of the Ummah, who is going to be from the line of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And the Prophet says, he is the one, man yaftahu husun zalala. He is the one who would conquer the forts of ignorance. Wa khuluban gulfa. He is going to be the one who would win over the hearts which have been sealed in the past. This is the Imam of our time, my dear and sisters. If we are willing to be the true companions of the Imam of our times, the Prophet is foretelling that when the Imam is going to come, he is going to break open and conquer the forts of ignorance, and he is going to break open the hearts which have been sealed. This is what the Imam of our time is going to do. And he is going to ban قلوبا غلفا يقوم بالدين في آخر الزمان, and would establish and revive deen, revive religion in the end times. كما خمت به في آخر الزمان, and how uh, uh, as I have done in the beginning, he is going to do in the end, my dear brothers and sisters. So if we are truly following, if we are truly aspiring for this Imam to come, then we need to ensure that we prepare ourselves to be the companions who were as loyal as the companions of Ahlul Bayt, starting from Amirul Mu'mineen all the way to the Imam of our time. I also wanted to talk a little bit about Imam Raza alayhi salam, because uh, you know 17 Safar also happens to be the martyrdom of Imam Raza. There are other dates also we follow, but I wanted to show how even the circumstances in which Imam Raza was forced into being the successor or designated successor of Mamun. Uh, it was not out of sincerity that Mamun wanted Imam Raza to be his successor, but it was out of necessity that Mamun realized that he cannot sustain this Khilafah and he cannot prevail over his brother Amin if he does not get the Alawis on his side. Harun Rashid was the Abbasi Khalifa, and he had two sons one from an Arab wife who was Amin, and the other was Mamun from a Persian wife. And both of these sons were competing for power. And Harun Rashid distributes his Khilafah into two sections, one, the Arab section being given to Amin, the Persian section being given to Mamun. But Mamun had bigger aspirations to control the whole region, which he eventually did by killing his own brother Amin and then by prevailing in this whole region. But he did it through the tactics and the diplomacy of makr, the diplomacy of deception to the people so that he can have the power all for himself. It was not like he was sincere in his approach. And while he was doing, he knew that especially the Persians, all the way from Kufa to the Persia, all those who converted to Islam, they had great affinity and respect for Ahl al-Bayt because they saw that it was only Amirul Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib who would grant justice to all Arab and Ajam. Otherwise, those Khulafa, those rulers who were before him and after him, they had given preferential treatment to Arabs over Ajam, to over non-Arabs. And it was Amir al-Mu'mineen who had ensured that justice prevails regardless of a person being Arab and Ajam. And so Ma'mun was seeing that the position of the Abbasis was weakening, whereas the zuhd and the taqwa of Ahl al-Bayt and their leadership had credibility in people. People respected Imam Raza because of the taqwa and the zuhd that he had. And however much the Abbasis would brag about their lineage and their association with the uncle of Rasulullah, they knew if they would go with an argument of lineage in front of people to legitimize their rule, then that discussion would end in the legitimacy of Ahl al-Bayt more than the Abbasis. Because Imam Raza was directly grandson of Rasulullah, not the grandson of the uncle of the Prophet. Imam Raza was the direct grandson of Rasulullah. So the legitimacy of lineage would fall in the hands of Ahl al-Bayt, and that's why they could not even use that. So that is why we find that the Abbasis would never desist from any opportunity to imprison or kill Ahl al-Bayt. And they wanted to find ways to show in public that they love Ahlul Bayt while they could keep them and they could control them. And on the other hand, when you see the mutiny, when the revolt, even within the palace of Bani Abbas, we find that women in the palace of Bani Abbas were becoming followers of Ahlul Bayt. Mother of Khalifa Mehdi used to send 30 dirhams along with her slave to do the ziyarah of Imam Hussein. The daughter of the uncle of Ma'mun, who was very influential, showed keen interest in Imam Raza. Zubayda, wife of Rashid, Harun Rashid, and granddaughter of Mansur, the most influential woman in Abbasi clan, had become a Shia, and when Rashid came to know of it, he swore that he would divorce her. even it became a cause of riots. History mentions that. In the interest of time, I'm going very, very quickly, and I want to give you a context in which Imam Raza was made a successor or designated successor. It was only deception of Mamun to deceive Alawis, to deceive those who loved Ahlul Bayt, as if Mamun is doing a favor. After him, Imam Raza is going to become Khalifa, when Imam Raza was 20 years older than Mamun. So if a normal age would, go by, Mamun would outlive Imam Raza because Imam Raza was 20 years older. But we find that these were the causes. Why Arabs did not approve of Mamun? Why was there resentment in Arabs? Because his mother, teacher and advisors, all of them were non-Arab. Because Mamun's mother was a Persian, everybody who was surrounding Mamun, they were all non-Arabs. That's why Arabs did not respect him, to see him worthy to be the Khalifa. They did not respect Mamun, and they did not consider him, the Arabs did not consider him worthy of being a Khalifa. Why? Because Amin, the brother of Mamun, who was the son of an Arab wife, they felt that he is worthy of being a Khalifa. And then also Mamun did not regard his father as much as Amin did in public. And his father Rashid persecuted Ahlul Bayt and favored the Abbasis. So now, if we look at the circumstances, we find that Mamun saw his Khilafah shaking, and the followers of Ahlul Bayt in his army revolting. In the army of Mamun, because it comprised of Persians, they were followers of Ahlul Bayt and they were revolting, and therefore he had to do something about it. Let me give you an example. Abu al-Sariya had a military posting in Kufa, revolted against Mamun. As a result, before he was caught and killed, 200,000 people lost their lives. This is the revolt within the army of Mamun. Another uprising in Basra against Mamun by the followers of Ahlul Bayt. Mecca, Muhammad bin Ja'far revolted in Mecca. Medina, Muhammad bin Sulaiman revolted in Medina. Madain, Muhammad bin Ismail revolted in Madain. So these were all revolts that were happening within the army of Mamun, because all these people had reverence and love for Ahlul Bayt. Therefore, Mamun decided that he would make Imam Raza his successor. And he had, as the historians of Islamic history mention, about 8 challenges to consolidate his rule. First was the challenge to neutralize these revolts and these mutinies that were occurring within his own army. And the second was to convince the family of Ahlul Bayt that Abbasi rule is legitimate. How is he going to do that? Then discredit the family of Ahlul Bayt in the eyes of people to lose their support. He had to do this. Then attain the confidence and loyalty of Arabs. Then continue to enforce his rule through Khurasan upon the entire Muslim world. Then the sixth one is to please Abbasis and continue to hold their loyalties who were enemies of the family of Ahlul Bayt. To create a sense of calm in people, to trust Mamun, which was shaken by his killing of his brother. And finally, the last challenge that Mamun had was secure himself against the insecurities of the fear of the popularity of Imam Raza to take over his rule. These were the reasons, my dear brothers and sisters, that Mamun would invite Imam Raza. And Mamun, how can he accomplish those goals? We know that Mamun knew he cannot accomplish these goals with the help of Arabs, as he killed his brother. He lost ground with the Persians due to his misrule and oppression. Therefore, the solution was to ensure that he uses the past enmity that he had with Bani Umayyah and persecute them to please the followers of Ahl al-Bayt so that they can get closer to him, and while it is being done, to get Imam Raza under his fold. That was the objective, my dear brothers and sisters. And the details are quite a bit, but I don't think we have enough time for us to continue the discussion. And as you know, that the Arba'in of Imam Hussein is also coming, and those who are already there, these are the ones who have been honored and blessed to be in the ziyarah of Arba'in. And as you all are aware, it is one of the signs of a believer that he goes to the ziyarah of Imam Hussein on the day of Arba'in. But even before we get that far, I just wanted to make sure that when Ma'mun was offering the Khilafah to Imam Raza by praising him and saying that you are going to be my successor, I want you to be in this position, Imam Raza avoided it until there was clear death threat. And how the Imam said, the Imam says, "Oh Ma'mun, if the Khilafah was yours as you deserved it by your qualification, you do not have a right to remove yourself from it, what Allah has honored you with. However, if this Khilafah does not belong to you, then you do not have a right to give something to someone that is not yours." But none of these excuses were sufficient. But all at the same time, my dear brothers and sisters, that Mamun wanted Imam Raza to be his designated successor, he had insecurities that would spring up, as history shows. It is the same Ma'mun that who insisted that Imam Raza goes and leads Salatul Eid. And when Imam Raza declines, saying that this is a state subject and I had agreed to become your successor only on a condition that I would not take part into any state activities, Ma'mun forced Imam Raza to go and lead the Salat. And when the Imam decides to go and lead the Salat, you know how the Imam leaves his home along with his companions. The army of Ma'mun was awaiting outside to receive Imam Raza and take him with all the pomp and all the glory of projecting him to be the successor of the Khalifa, with all the bells and whistles of that time, showing how great this army is, how great this nation is. But they find that Imam Raza alayhi salam comes in white clothing, barefooted, with white clothing and wearing the amama of his grandfather Rasulullah, and calling upon Labbaik Allahumma Labbaik. And we find that the moment Imam started reciting the takbirat of the Eid, of the Salatul Eid, while he's walking towards the central mosque where he would lead the prayer, people realized that the Imam has come out, and they also started echoing and saying the same words that the Imam was saying. And in no time, there were thousands of people who were accompanying the Imam, and it seemed like the skies were doing takbirat of Eid, until a messenger conveys the message to Mamun. What are you doing, Mamun? Do you want a revolt to happen in this salat? If this salat is carried forward by Imam Raza, he will be the Khalifa after it. You better stop him and make him go back. And then Mamun sends a messenger and say, "Thank you very much. We don't want you to lead the salat." This is how insecure they were, my dear brothers and sisters. This is how close the Imam came when it comes to followers. Although we find there were few companions of Imam Hussein in Karbala, but they were loyal. They were not willing to leave the Imam under any circumstances. There is a companion whose name is Bushair, whose son was captured outside of Karbala in Kufa. And just before Ashura, when Imam is made aware of this, Imam calls upon Bushair and he says, "Oh Bushair, I would want you to go and free your son. I know how your heart is aching for your beloved son. And Imam took some expensive clothing and gave it to him. And he said, "Oh Bushair, take this clothing and make sure that you give this as a money so that your son could be freed." But we find, my dear brothers and sisters, that Bushair did not abandon the Imam. In fact, there are words of the ziyarah that recalls what Bushair had said. Bushair starts crying profusely and he says, "Oh Imam, even if ferocious animals they come and they bite me into pieces and tear me into pieces, I am not going to leave you, not for my son and not for anybody." My dear brothers and sisters, these were the loyal companions of the Imam who were willing to sacrifice their own loved ones for the sake of the grandson of Rasulullah. And we find that Bushair was the last of the companions of the Imam before those who joined from the family members to sacrifice themselves. This is the loyalty we find in Karbala. And there are so many other loyal companions that the Imam of our time says, "May my life be sacrificed over you, O martyrs of Karbala." To these people, this is the maqam and the station that they have attained. I would ask you to imagine and take your hearts into Karbala. Those of you who have already done the ziyarah of Imam Hussein, they could imagine being in between Haramain, Haram of Hazrat Abbas and Haram of Imam Hussein. But those of us who have not been, for all of us, I would pray that Allah would grant a sustenance of the ziyarah of Ahlul Bayt and especially of Imam Hussein in Karbala in the coming years and in the coming times. Let us take our hearts there and see how Ahlul Bayt, when Yazid calls upon Imam Zainul Abidin and says that I am seeing Rasulullah in my dream. Every time I close my eyes, I see Rasulullah coming into my dream and saying, "Oh Yazid, what did my progeny do to you? Is this the reward for the services that I have rendered to a point that I have decided to free you? Oh Ali ibn al-Hussein, you are free to take yourself and your family, your Ahl al-Bayt, wherever you like. I am willing to give the mounts to carry you." And we see that Imam Zainul Abidin comes back and asks Aunt Zainab and says, "Oh Aunt Zainab, Yazid is saying that we are free, we can leave and we can go wherever we desire, and he is going to provide us the means to travel." Upon that, Zainab says, "Oh Sayyid Sajjad, how can we leave so quickly without conducting the majlis and azah of my beloved brother Hussein? We have not had the opportunity to conduct majlis and azah and mourning of my brother Hussein. The first thing that I would like to do is to host a majlis and azah and mourning ceremony for my brother Hussein and the martyrs of Karbala." And a house was given and a house was vacated where Ahlul Bayt went, and the women of Sham were invited, and then all the heads of Shuhada there were brought, all the holy heads of Shuhada were brought. And while the heads were arriving and the women of Sham were watching how the family of Rasulullah is mourning for those martyrs, there was the holy head of Qasim ibn Hassan that arrives into the house. And when Qasim ibn Hassan's head arrives, it is Farwa who reaches forward and takes the Qasim ibn Hassan's head into her arms. And then the head of Hazrat Abbas arrives, and we find that Kulsum comes forward and takes the head of Hazrat Abbas. And when the head of Ali Akbar arrives, we find Layla coming and reaching out to the head of Ali Akbar and
the head of Ali Akbar into his arms, and we find finally that the head of Imam Hussein arrives. Zainab Kubra reaches out and takes the head of Imam Hussein into her arms, and he says, "Oh my Jai, oh my beloved brother, see, Zainab has been freed. Zainab had protected your movement, O Hussein. Zainab is mourning for you today. Zainab is in deep mourning. Ahlul Bayt are in deep mourning until and unless some of the women of Sham, they notices there are two heads that are lying there and nobody is mourning for them, and they start talking about them. Whose heads are these? Seems like their mother has passed away. There is nobody to mourn for them. You know who the heads were belong to, my dear brothers and sisters. These were the heads of Aun and Muhammad, the beloved sons of Zainab. Zainab hears that and she says, I am their mother and I am alive, but I have sacrificed them for my brother Hussein. I have sacrificed them for the son of Fatima. I have sacrificed them for the grandson of Rasulullah. I have sacrificed them for the sake of Islam. I shall not mourn them. I would only mourn for my brother. But even this Zainab, when she comes to Medina and finally arrives into her house, and when she enters the house and she sees those rooms in which Aun and Muhammad used to live, when she enters them, her heart is broken and she is crying profusely on her sons Aun and Muhammad until Abdullah, her husband, arrives and he sees that there is an old woman who is mourning and crying, and he enters and he says, "Oh lady, my wife Zainab is not here. If you are here to extend your condolences to Zainab, she is staying with Ali ibn al-Hussein. You can return." When Zainab sees Abdullah, she says, "Oh Abdullah, you have also not recognized me. This is Zainab, oh Abdullah. I lost Hussein in Karbala. I lost our sons in Karbala. I lost Ali Akbar in Karbala. Oh Abdullah, I resisted and I conveyed the message of the oppression that was conducted by Bani Umayyah while we were being carried as prisoners from Karbala to Kufa and Kufa to Sham. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, give us tawfiq and inspiration such that we can truly live up to your expectations, Ya Allah. We ask you, Allah, to protect life, honor, property, and dignity of believers wherever they are. We ask you, Allah, to cure those who are sick in our community. We ask you, Allah, to forgive those who have passed away from our community. We ask you, Allah, to hasten the reappearance of your Hujjah and make us such that your Hujjah will be pleased with us. Let us recite a Surah Fatiha for all of our mu'mineen, marhumeen who have passed away, and especially the marhumeen of the sponsors of tonight's program. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد ولم يكن له كفوا قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد اللهم صل اللهم صل